Hi everyone, welcome to Maxwell Chambers, and for those of you who gave up a public holiday to turn up, even more grateful. So today we have a very interesting talk about generative AI, and it's a topic which has grown in increasing importance. Unfortunately, AI is one of those things which most of us think we know what it is, and we probably don't, because it's such a broad, all-encompassing word, and for many of us, we probably have in our minds some version of the kind that we see in popular culture, whether it's robots that go around trying to take over the world, or some big digital consciousness that wants to enslave us, or basically just computers that talk. So today's focus will be actually on one strand of AI, because actually AI has been with us in many forms, whether it's self-driving cars or facial recognition or even your search engines that help you find what you're looking for. But the one that we're focusing on today is generative AI, which has taken the world by storm in the last 6 months or so, particularly with the rise of ChatGPT, but not only that, because there are many others like Midjourney and the rest, which produce content that's not text. For example, images, videos, and music as well. So this, like any other technological achievement, brings with it great new opportunities, but also challenges. What is of concern, obviously, is the pace at which this is happening, where it's moving far faster than regulators and governments understand it, and we can't adapt as quickly to the changes that are being wrought by this. So I think this is a conversation that's just the first step in many conversations that we're going to have to try to understand what this is, how it will impact us, and how we should respond to it. So today we have a great panel, but I'm only going to introduce the moderator first, and she will introduce the rest. She herself is someone who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce her anyway. So Chien is a very highly regarded international arbitrator, in particular in Asia, but internationally. But she's also a board member of Maxwell Chambers. So in a way, I'm introducing my own boss, who will then give you the rest of the panel. So Chien, please.
Thank you very much, Junyan. And we have our boss, Daryl Chu, in the back of the room, who is the chair. But thank you very much for the kind introductions, and welcome everyone this afternoon on a public holiday to what we hope will enlighten you on the watershed moment in generative AI and the implications on ADR. This afternoon, in our hour or so together, we will have a varied perspective on the topic. We have regulators in the room, we have academics in the room, we have entrepreneurs in the room, and we have users, and we have the legal sector, and we only have 4 individuals, so these individuals wear multiple hats. I will serve as your moderator, but really I'm here to introduce each of them and let them take the floor on this topic where they are truly experts. We will have presentations by each of them because they have varied experiences, but we will engage in an interactive way. And so we do welcome you in the room, but we also, of course, welcome those who are dialing in remotely as well. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Mimi Zhou. Dr. Zhou is a professor and academic. She was the director of studies in law at Regent's Park College, and is now a professor at Exeter University. She wears many, many, many hats, and her CV goes on. She is an entrepreneur. She is the founder of De-Riskly, which she will explain to you what that is. We had a glimpse of that, but she also is steeped in expertise in deep tech, comparative Chinese law, and the list goes on. I will let her share her experience on AI and just share with us and really give us a primer on the topic, please.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you very much, Maxwell Chambers and Three Crowns, for enabling me to attend and basically speak at this panel with also very illustrious colleagues. So as Chen said, I come from many backgrounds. I am an academic. entrepreneur. I'm still a lawyer. I don't practice full time, but I think for today, I guess the reason why I'm on this stage is that I've had quite a number of years working on research and the application of that research in relation to deep technologies and dispute resolution. So I set up Oxford's first legal tech lab when I was there a few years ago, and that really focused on researching the development and deployment of new technologies such as AI and blockchain in the context of dispute resolution, which obviously includes ADR. So I have had an ADR background as well as litigator previously, having worked at a few different international firms. So I've been asked to give a primer on the technology itself. Not an easy task. I am still in the middle of finishing a computer science degree, but I work on a daily basis with computer scientists. And it's both in terms of my research and the startup, Deriskly. We're a reg tech company that deploys AI to help financial services comply with regulations. And for me, looking at where generative AI has come over the last few years have been quite unexpected in the sense of the pace of development. And obviously, when ChatGPT was popularized last year, and everyone now is talking about AI, including my mom, it's sort of like, wow, you know, I've been working in this area, the intersection of law, regulation, and AI for so many years, and now people are really, and particularly policymakers, are very much looking at, okay, how do we actually regulate this technology? So what is this technology to start with? Look, there's many different types of AI, and some of you probably have, you know, been exposed to AI even long before ChatGPT. It's been used in many different sectors, you know, for a long time. I mean, you know, there are AI scientists who go back to several decades ago. So today's not, you know, going to be a lecture, otherwise I'll be here for hours, on all the different types of AI out there, or even really a lecture about, you know, the details of how generative AI work. I'm going to say that I'm not a computer scientist. I'm trying to be, but it's hard. But I think maybe what working definition of AI we have is, again, because of my legal background, I really thought hard about what to sort of use, which definition to use. And in the end, I just thought, okay, look, the EU Act, the AI Act, is probably the best because we're all lawyers, or at least most of this room either come from law and policy. And so AI is defined as machine-based. An AI system is a machine-based system designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy, and that can, for explicit or implicit objectives, generate outputs such as predictions, recommendations, or decisions that influence physical or virtual environments. Okay, so that is a very high level of, and quite a non-technical definition of AI. And that definition is going to be very important. And this is why I use it, because the EU AI Act, and we'll talk a bit more about what Singapore is doing later on, is going to have a huge impact. And I know the Brussels effect is often contested. We've seen it in the case of data protection, but certainly Brussels is wanting to be at the forefront of governing this technology. So I'm just going to use their definition for now. So in terms of what we see with machine learning, which is a subset of AI, that's been obviously very hot property for the last few years. I would say that this is really a time where we're seeing very sophisticated machine learning that's developed. And essentially what machine learning entails, it basically is machines passing data, learning from it, and then is able to make, the output can be making decisions, predictions. The machine learning models are usually trained, as we all know, on large data sets, The learning is the reiterative learning, so it improves the accuracy over time. And it's sort of, when I think about it, the sort of traditional machine learning, because I'm going to compare it now to generative AI, which is very much a subset of this, particularly around deep learning and neural networks. It's like traditional machine learning is like teaching a child how to recognize a chicken. We've got chickens at lunch. Okay, so it basically, you show the child lots of pictures of chickens, but maybe some dogs or other birds, and the child learns how to identify the chicken. Okay, that's a really simple analogy, but one that you also probably would be familiar with. Now, generative AI really goes that step further. It goes beyond simply recognizing patterns, making predictions. As we know, those of you who've used ChatGPT, it generates new and original content. Original, I say, original in an inverted comma, because it mimics essentially the data that it was trained on. And so when you go back to my analogy, it's sort of like teaching that child to draw a dog after you showed that, or chicken, sorry, whatever animal you want that child to learn, to not just like point out that is a chicken, but actually draw the chicken. And that chicken could look very similar to the original pictures of the chicken that you've shown the child, or it can create something completely new. So, you know, Banji talked about Midjourney. You know, it's really probably the most well-known generative AI in this sort of visual space. It's you know, created stuff that it goes beyond the human imagination sometimes by just simple prompts.
Mimi,
So I think, yeah, go on.
Can I interrupt you for a second and just ask the question about the origination point? Because I think this is quite interesting in terms of, certainly for those of you who have spent the week with us in Singapore Convention Week, we have talked a lot about AI, robots, etc. And I did a debate on this. And so one of the issues that we were looking at was whether there is a possibility of origination. Now you're saying generative AI can do that and can draw that picture. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit further in the legal space, in the law firm space?
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, in terms of like machine learning, so just in terms of, you know, because we are talking about, is this a watershed, right? So machine learning has been applied in the legal tech space for a long time. It's a long time in the sense of like people here are not too young, but when I explain to my students like AI applications in legal tech, like contract review or e-discovery, or even more recent AI tools in dispute resolution that is able to predict like outcomes of you know, what a judge on a certain day, given the judge's track record on this issue. So that's all about prediction based,
right?
Yeah. And that specific example in the context of dispute resolution. And there's a lot of legal tech companies doing great things, and you know, that deploys this sort of more traditional AI, machine learning, recognizing patterns from vast sets of data. But now with generative AI, I guess what we've seen is that ability to then go further. And we've already seen the trouble that some lawyers have faced in the US, where they have basically used ChatGPT or similar tools to write like submissions, right? Which is terribly problematic, because obviously we know that there are a lot of technical still obstacles with respect to making up references. I marked my students' international arbitration essays a few months ago, and I was very diligent because I knew most of them use ChatGPT, and I was carefully looking at all the references they use, and there were some very shocking references that I've never ever heard of. So we are seeing, obviously, you know, this trend where there's nothing wrong with using ChatGPT to even come up with some simple first drafts. That could be very helpful for lawyers, generating this sort of content. But of course, we then want to look into more specific legal large language models that would probably be more accurate than like ChatGPT is trained on. Now, we actually don't know what ChatGPT, the parameters it's trained on, it's unknown, but it's a significant number, it's huge. So, but it's not tailored specifically to the legal context. So, so I think that context is really important. And I'm not against, again, using generative AI in the sense of helping prepare submissions.
First drafts.
Yeah, first drafts. I think we have to embrace technology, but do it in a way that our profession has ethical standards, and to really like make stuff up or use ChatGPT that does make stuff up and you don't review those references is highly like irresponsible. And so I think the sanctions that some of the US courts have imposed in these examples that we've seen in the headlines is something that is it has to be, something has to be done.
A starting point for regulation.
That's right, the starting point for regulation. So so I think in terms of what else I want to mention, so I think in terms of this technology is happening very quickly. Just back to the primer, GPT-1 2018, it was trained on only 117 million. It's really only because, again, fast forward to GPT 3.5, where it was 175 billion. And GPT-4, we just don't know. It's obviously going to be higher than that. So, and then there's going to be GPT-5, so GPT-4, we don't know, GPT-5, etc. This is going to happen very quickly. So I'm going to wrap off just in terms of this introduction with some limitations and cautions, but that pertains to obviously the current technology itself. So GPT-4, which is what we have right now, is obviously works with multiple models. It's visual and text, and it is kind of the most sophisticated in the sense that we're lawyers in this room. My sister's a doctor. I know, a classic Asian family. The fact that this technology can match or outperform humans in bar exams and medical exams is quite phenomenal, and obviously raising a lot of concerns also about what do we do with the next generation of lawyers? How should we train them? Okay, if they're better, if ChatGPT is better to write the first draft, like what should we actually teach them at law school? That's what we teach them, solving case problems. And the challenges I see from a technical point of view, because I'm sure we'll get to the governance shortly, is that right now there is still a lot of challenges with respect to context. I think when you try ChatGPT, like just the general version, it can come up with some very technically strong answers, and they're technically strong, but often if you go a bit deeper, they would miss the real world context. And that's what, arbitrators, mediators, it's not just about, the skills that humans have, but it's humans' ability to really grasp the nuances of different real world contexts. That's still not quite there with this technology. So this is why there's hallucinations. It can come up with responses that are just completely irrelevant. And so there's also right now technologically challenges in terms of long-term memory. So if you try ChatGPT, you follow the conversations, it really struggles to maintain consistencies in the text that it produces during your chat. At the moment, there is always a cutoff point in terms of the training of data. So you can't, ask ChatGPT whether today there's a typhoon, because I'm flying to China tomorrow, whether the typhoon in southern China is going to happen or is going to affect my flight. That's pretty recent real-time information. It's not yet possible with the main applications of GPT, these bots. And then obviously there's a lot of misuse, and I think that's where we really need to start thinking very quickly about how to best mitigate the risks associated with these technologies while ensuring that the benefits are realized. And those risks could be, we talk about hallucinations a lot. That's just only one aspect, but there's a lot of issues around what's called jailbreaking. So if you look at ChatGPT, like if I wanted to start a meth lab, right now I can't go to ChatGPT and say, I want to start a meth lab. How do I actually do it? I say this because Breaking Bad is one of my favorite TV series. So there's obviously content moderation, but of course there's like many hackers out there that are like, there are prompts you can use. One of them is called "Do Anything Now," Dan, that you can break free of the content moderation that is undertaken by ChatGPT. And basically the responses can be racist, homophobic, sexist, or whatever, or incite violence. So that obviously taps into issues about free speech as well. We don't have time today, but obviously, responsible AI needs to take into account these risks of abuse. And there's more issues, but I think privacy, confidentiality, I'm sure we'll hear more from other speakers today. But ultimately, I'll just end with sort of my kind of assessment of where all of this is going. I think it's useful to refer to the Gartner hype cycle. So it goes through stages of technology, the benefits of technology becomes realized. And the first stage is hype. Okay, it's really, oh my God, we've got this brand new gadget called ChatGPT, Midjourney, whatever Bard, whatever applications of generative AI that is just really shiny and new. And we had that. This hype phase, I think, was really, like, I would say late last year to about March. Everyone was like, oh my God, it's the most it's the biggest thing after Facebook. When Facebook was launched, it didn't have the sort of increase in users like ChatGPT had. And then there's a period of disillusionment. And I think that's where we are now. The next stage after hype is disillusionment, because we now realize, holy crap, there's a lot of problems with this technology. There's a lot of risks that we have to manage. And then after this kind of trough of disillusionment is going to be going to what we call a plateau of productivity. And that next phase, I think once we get regulation in place and governance, so I'm pointing her, she's going to talk about policy and governance, is when we want to reach that plateau of productivity where the full benefits of this technology are going to be realized across all sectors for society. Because that's the mindset we need to have, is how do we get from this, currently this disillusionment, because the hype was, and now it's like, oh my goodness, we need to now talk about regulation. How can regulation move that cycle to that plateau of productivity where we're really seeing the advantages of this technology being harnessed for the good of society?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that primer. It's it's fascinating to see kind of where we are and where we might be going, and in particular the realities. I think that it seems to me that whilst we see that there are limitations, at the pace at which we are developing this, it feels limitless. And so I think whilst many of us remain skeptics in the room, especially in the legal sector, I think it is here to stay, and we should envision that it could do everything for us, or a huge part of what we do in present day legal industry. Thank you very much. We've got Wesley Tan here, dialing in from the sky in this room somewhere, but he is joining us and is the true user in the world. He is the Senior Technology and Product Counsel at Grab. And so he is really at the coalface of a lot of the work that's being done in the business side, and necessarily he will see it on the legal side. And so I'm inviting Wesley to please introduce your work and share with us your thoughts, please.
Yeah, hi everybody. Can you hear me, first of all? Am I laggy, breaking up or anything? Because my connection is not so good, I think.
Yeah, so far I can hear you. I will let you know if we can't.
Okay, all right, okay. So good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Wesley. As Kian said, I'm a legal counsel here in Grab. I wear many hats in Grab. One of them is exploring generative AI in the way that we can onboard some of these generative AI vendors to assist us with whatever Grab requires, right? So maybe I can just start off by giving you some examples of what Grab may be looking into. I think someone alluded to this earlier about generative AI not being just text-based. So it's not just ChatGPT, right? You have a chat with a bot and it gives you some answers. But there are a lot of other things that it does, like for example, converting text to images, assisting with code, like software coding, assisting with metadata tagging, so data classification and all these kind of things. So some of the basic examples that we have for Grab itself, and for those of you who don't know, Grab is primarily in the ride hailing and food deliveries business. So one part of the equation is the food deliveries. When the merchants are on our platform, they have menus there. Some of them do not have pictures or images that come with their food menu, right? So I give you an example. Maybe if they put like Hainanese chicken rice, it's just plain text there. It looks very flavorless. Not many consumers are attracted to purchase a plate of that chicken rice if there isn't an image there. So one of the hypotheses that the Grab engineers have is that if you put in any image, it doesn't have to be the actual image of that food menu item, but just a sample image of it, the conversion rate is at least 10% higher for those kind of menu items. So one of the ways that the generative AI is being explored is whether it can take some of these food menus, which are plain text, and then generate AI generated image to kind of go with that text, right? So like the Hainanese chicken rice example again, it will just put up a sample. Maybe it takes 100 images of Hainanese chicken rice on Google or something, and then it mashes together one image of Hainanese chicken rice. Maybe it won't look so nice, but at least there's something there. And that's the hypothesis, right? That if there's an image accompanying the text, there will be a higher conversion rate. Other things like I mentioned, the code assistance. So for example, some of the code checking, like for example, I don't really know whether any of you are like code engineers here, but there's a lot of checking that is involved in software coding. There's a lot of QA, qualitative analysis kind of testing in the code to test for bugs, for defects, for areas of the code that doesn't work. And then one of the ways that generative AI can help here is really to take that work away from the human engineers, which we classify to be like lower value kind of work, and let them concentrate on higher value work and basically just code check their code to make sure that everything is running smoothly. So that's the second big bucket. The third one is like what I mentioned, the data classification. And that one is really because Grab sits on a lot of data. And sometimes some of our, we make a lot of human errors in tagging the databases. And generative AI model with the ability to compute all of that at one single, in one single frame of mind, is easy in the sense that it will ensure consistency in data tagging and metadata classification. So that's another area that we are looking at as well. So that's really for the potential of generative AI for Grab as a business itself. I'd like to take some time now to zoom in into the legal department itself. So like, for example, how am I using generative AI in my work, right? And so one way that I'm using it, that I have used it was because one of my hats that I wear in Grab is a product counsel. And product counsel, if I can put it or summarize it very shortly, it's just that you take one of the Grab verticals or what we call products, like so for example, again, like ride hailing or food deliveries, and you see that product through from end to end. So if they have a new project, for example, they want to initiate a generative AI product as part of the life cycle of one of its products, then the legal counsel, the product counsel, sits in end to end to understand the early stages of that project as well as to advise on it, right? So Grab traditionally doesn't have a product counsel kind of a JD, a job description for its counsel. So one of my earliest tasks when I first joined Grab was to give a training on what does a product counsel do, what are the skill sets required of a product counsel. So very quickly, you can, if you go and type this into ChatGPT and say, can you give me a curriculum for a typical role of a product counsel, it can spit it out for you very easily. They can give you a one-pager straight away, a framework, right? So again, I think like what Mimi was saying is don't use it irresponsibly. It's there to give you a starting point, a framework, a skeletal framework. And so I use that to like kind of frame my thoughts. And then from there, I break down the points and then I go put in the content and flesh out the content myself. But it saved me a lot of time. So I didn't have to come up with that curriculum from scratch. I didn't have to think of the different pointers that I should come in from. And so that was very helpful when I used it. Something very similar to that was where I had to give a training to my other legal counsels on open source software. That's another area that I'm looking at. And again, here, because it's not like legal research where you need like case by case kind of analysis and all that. It's more like a textbook. And I find that ChatGPT or generative AI is more helpful in this kind of areas where it's more general in nature. You're just giving a general presentation, high level kind of presentation on it. So I also used it for a one pager. Like I typed in, can you give me a summary of what open source software is? The target audience is other legal counsels in a tech company. And it was able to spit out a one pager again. And then obviously again, I used it as a guideline and elaborated on it. Yeah. So these are the few areas again, into two buckets, one from the business end of it, and one where generative AI can be useful for a legal counsel in a legal department. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wesley. I think it's really useful and really quite important for us as the legal industry to have a sense as to what the business side is doing and how people like Wesley, who are legal counsel within very technologically focused industries, engage with it in their work, but also do see what is going on the business side. This Hainan chicken rice image that has been produced in raising sales is quite something that I think is interesting. And I'm sure there is a way that we can apply that in our legal services industry somehow. So it's very interesting to hear from you as to what the uses are already and to this day. Before we move on to the regulator, do we have any questions for Wesley or indeed Mimi?
Maybe I can add on one thing first, because I think something prompted it.
Yes,
yeah,
Wesley.
sorry, was someone talking? Sorry. Yeah. I mean, just one quick point. Like one of the potential uses that I would find useful for generative AI, going back to that Hainanese chicken rice example, would be kind of like a generative AI that could convert like a 10-page memo into like a 10-slide kind of presentation for C-suite kind of an audience, right? Like they want a quick legal summary of what's going on. Yes or no, can I do this? What are the red flags and all these kind of things that can be extracted from a 10-page memo. I think that would be very useful for my line of work.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are apps already that do this kind of work.
Yes.
I know, for example, infographics seem to be a big deal now, where they are able to synthesize books and articles, like Daniel Kahneman's Think Fast and Slow. They can do that on a one-page infographic for you. And, there are apps that kind of do that. And so there are synthesis products already that are able to whittle it into pictorials or decision trees, which I think is helpful to your point, Wesley, and I'm sure will have use in our legal services industry as well. Yes, Anna.
Thank you. I have a quick question. Do you have, for Wesley, do you have in your company, or have you been asked as a legal counsel for your company to put together a code of conduct or some ethical rules for the company in using AI?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes, definitely, we do, and it's not purely a legal angle that's needed. We have a big AI risk committee within Grab, so it pulls together experts. Legal is definitely one of them, but data governance team is involved. Cybersecurity is involved. Data protection officer is involved, and some of the senior executives of the tech engineers, because a lot of these AI hygiene and ethics actually flows from the technical engineers themselves, who actually understand generative AI and the kind of pitfalls that you may fall in. Legal is only one side of the equation, so the short answer to that is yes, but there are a lot more cooks involved in it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it will nicely segue into our next speaker. But the fact that private sector is already regulating individually, and in terms of your flow, the watershed moment, and then this dip that we had, I know that private companies did have a pause in creation. Exactly, to take a pause and reflect on exactly what is needed in order to take some control of this particular area of extreme growth. And so I do think that there is a lot of focus paid on in the private sector, but Denise maybe will be able to share with us exactly what's happening on the regulatory side from the government's perspective. Denise Wong is the Deputy Commissioner of the Personal Data Protection Commission, and as also the Assistant Chief Executive of Data Innovation and Protection from the Singapore government. So hopefully you can share with us and enlighten us a little bit on regulation and what the Singapore government has been looking at in this space.
So hi everyone, and thank you to Maxwell Chambers and Three Crowns for having us today. Really interesting topic. I confess that I'm a lawyer by training, with the Attorney General for a long time, and having come into this space, it's been 3 months of intense deep diving into the technicalities of AI, and it's been a really, really interesting experience. Just a bit about background. I came into IMDA about 3 years ago from Chambers to look at digital regulations horizontally, because there was a very strong sense in the Singapore government that in order to be a hub for digital and to provide a future for digital for Singapore, we needed to have a safe and secure environment to do that. So before taking on this portfolio, I was actually looking at trust and safety, working in online safety, working in online scam and anti-scam issues in the networks. And so it's a very natural segue into this role, which is really about data protection and data governance, but also AI regulation generally. And I must say that I use regulation in a very sort of small r, soft sort of way, because the Singapore government's approach to AI governance today is about soft touch. I would say that we have done it this way all along from 2018. And our approach I would characterize as number one, trying to be practical, issuing practical guidance, issuing guide to organizations, and that's something we did in 2018 with a model governance framework and also a self-assessment guide for organizations. I'll touch a little bit on it later. The other thing that we believe in is a balance between market innovation and industry, ability for industry to use the technology in a way that also protects consumers. So for us, there is always that balance between the end user and the industry. We take that approach with data protection, and we intend to continue with that approach for AI. Then I guess the natural question, and going back to the topic today, it is how has generative AI changed this? And I have to say I've spoken on at least 4 or 5 panels this week. That's just how popular the topic is. And I always get the question, what and how has generative AI changed your approach, especially as a new commissioner coming in? And I would say actually it's going to be a very similar approach, but there are key differences and characteristics of generative AI, Mimi has touched a little bit on it, that we think needs or requires some slight tweaks. The first is the foundational nature of the technology. In the past, most AI systems were fairly bespoke, trained, and then implemented and deployed in certain applications. I think the interesting thing about generative AI as we see it today is that it's being created by certain large models, huge models with huge parameters are being developed, and those serve as the foundational layer for numerous applications to be built on top of it. So we see, and a lot of us have played with the commercial applications of ChatGPT, but actually GPT-3, GPT 3.5, GPT-4 is it's most powerful as an engine for other applications to be built on top. And the APIs built on top of that is really where it's powerful. But the foundational nature also means that the applications that are built on top inherit its risks. And that's a really interesting part of it, that any regulation or any governance structures, which is actually governance is the word I prefer to use, deals with it. The second characteristic, besides foundational, is generative, which is part of the name. And I think in the past, we were dealing with systems that actually essentially help to make decisions, help make recommendations. This is the first time we're really seeing a democratized technology that allows you to generate content. And in my previous hat, dealing with online safety, dealing with violence on the internet, dealing with social cohesion or the danger of not having social cohesion and divisions, that generative aspect becomes very critical because it has huge potential for misuse. So I think these two characteristics are what's interesting. Can I just get the slide on something that we've done quite recently together with Icadium, which is a Temasek-linked AI company. And we actually wrote a discussion paper. No problem. Sure, no problem. So we actually wrote a discussion paper on the implications of generative AI, its risks, and a possible governance approach. This paper was something that we put up in June, and you can download it using that QR code, which really sets out some of the thinking that we have. It is a discussion paper, so I would very much welcome your feedback. We thought about couching it as a report or white paper, but we thought that at the end of the day, we don't have all the answers. You know, this is something that's really meant to generate discussion in the community. But what I wanted to just quickly take you through is the diagram on the right. Is a little bit small on your screen, but this diagram is also found in the discussion paper. And it really has certain sort of key elements that we think really should drive the discussion around this topic. But more importantly, it's also driving how we make policy in this space. And the first aspect I wanted to touch on is accountability. Accountability, and if you go back to that foundational characteristic that I mentioned, accountability is about how we share out responsibility between the foundational model developer, the application deployer, and the end user. And these three people, or three sort of actors in that supply chain should have different types of responsibilities and roles and potentially liability. So that is something that we're thinking about, and we're working on policy pieces around that. The other area that we're thinking about is the content distribution lifecycle. And that is about how this generative AI content, going back again to that second characteristic, is disseminated. Because we don't think that this conversation should end with the OpenAIs and the Anthropics, and it should also involve the Instagrams and the Facebooks that are disseminating this content. And that has really recently gained traction as well in a conversation that we're sort of, I won't have time to talk about it, but it's about content provenance, watermarking, labeling, and making sure that consumers can detect artificially generated content. So that's in the accountability space. Another sort of bucket that we're looking at, and that's box number 2, is data. And I think those are, very familiar to lawyers. Issues about copyright, issues about data protection. We've actually recently launched a public consultation on the use of data in discriminative AI systems. You can find it on our website, and feel free to give us your feedback. I can say that we are working on a piece on discriminative AI and that's really wearing my data protection hat. I switch hats fairly regularly in this space. But how should data be used, and how should data be generated? It's something that we're quite interested in. And I have to say, again, I'm balancing both the regulatory function that I hold with the economic development function that I hold, because we do think there is immense potential for this technology in sectors, including the legal sector. Very quickly, I'll touch on the third and fourth squares or boxes. And that's really the work that we're doing in assurance, evaluation, model deployment, and development. And here, I would say we spend most of our time so far Actually, can I get the next slide? Maybe that will help, because actually, I don't know if any of you have heard of AI Verify. I hope you have. AI Verify is an ethical framework and testing toolkit that we launched in June. And we had engineering teams in-house build a toolkit that companies can actually take and use to test their AI systems in order to demonstrate and verify that it is responsible. I have to say today, number one, it does not deal with generative AI, so I want to make that very clear. It's more in the supervised learning space, okay? But we actually based the toolkit on these 11 internationally recognized principles that we took off our model governance framework that was in turn aligned with the OECD principles. And we've open sourced it because we realized that we couldn't build this alone. It was just too difficult and too cutting edge to figure out how AI should be tested in a variety of situations. So for any of coders in the room, lawyers come coders in the room, the toolkit is available on GitHub. You can go and play with it, deploy it into your own systems, test it. We're actually looking for use cases, and we're working together with companies to do that. If you go to the next slide as well, the toolkit is launched within an open source foundation. I think this is one of the first open source foundations in the world launched by a government. It is a fully non-profit foundation, and it's really meant to foster international conversation. We have about 60 members globally already, including 7 premium members. We have a lot of the companies that have built some of these models, such as Microsoft and IBM, but we also have other smaller companies that are looking to build applications on top. And it's free to join. You can just join the foundation, use the toolkit, and also collaborate with other members in order to figure out how you can deploy AI technology within your system in a responsible way. I must say the foundation is really an experiment for us too. It was an idea that we thought that we could create this neutral platform for industry to have a conversation about responsible AI that would then better inform our policy. I think I just wanted to touch on one other point that maybe we haven't talked about so much, and that's the idea of international cooperation and alignment. I think with the hype and with any new technology, I think there's maybe a natural tendency, certainly in industry, but to be frank, in governments as well, to sort of see, okay, who can be faster, who can do better. Our point of view is that that is not helpful. And what industry could really benefit from is international alignment. I think that we would benefit if there was a open conversation and alignment of standards and open and an alignment of testing capabilities and an ability for companies to demonstrate compliance in a low-cost way. So the other thing that we're doing is working with as many jurisdictions and regulators as we can in order to dock our principles. And so we're always quite careful to be quite open source it, have conversations. We're actually in conversations with the US NIST, which is actually the standard setting body in the US that came up with their own risk management framework. And we'll be, Chatham House rules, right? So we'll be announcing something soon that demonstrates how AI Verify docks into the RMF and vice versa. And we do think those conversations are quite important to make sure that, I mean, many of you have clients, for example, who are global companies that operate in multiple jurisdictions. It doesn't really make sense for every country to go its own way, because that just raises costs. So that, in summary, is the approach. No one single piece of legislation. It's really about implementable guidance and working quite closely with industry. It's really about building technical capability and finding a way for companies to come in, test, demonstrate responsibility, and putting the accountability on the companies to show that actually the technology can be widely deployed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. It sounds like you're creating a whole new universe of regulation, and it seems to me quite overwhelming as to all the various facets of regulation, enforcement, cooperation, and local issues as well. One question I had is whether there is the potential of a legal infrastructure as well, in terms of when one could sue the originator of the ChatGPT itself, or for defamation, or issues that could arise with the systems itself, and the enforcement of that area. Is that something that is within your remit, or?
Well, I mean, defamation doesn't fall within
Right.
it's part of the private law action. But I would say that we are asking ourselves that same question more broadly, and looking at how, I should say, existing laws and levers can be used to deal with this new technology. And I would say, as technology lawyers, all of us in this room realize that with any new wave of technology, there is always that question that we ask ourselves. My own view is that the laws that we have today are just about enough to deal with this current technology, especially malicious use, which we haven't really touched on today. So we do have, for example, online safety legislation that I touched on that we passed last year. We do have misinformation legislation, and we have indeed sort of drilled down, and obviously the data protection legislation, copyright legislation. And we do have just about enough in the ecosystem to address some of these issues that the technology brings up. But indeed, because of the foundational and generative nature, I think that we'll have to keep a careful eye on it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Yes,
could
yes,
just have
please.
an intervention as well.
Please.
I think also, I mean, obviously this room is kind of the enthusiasts in terms of learning about generative AI, and there's going to be more new technologies that come. So, and there's going to be inevitably more disputes and things that raise a lot of legal issues that come before our courts. And so I think this is something we also have to think about, is also whether adjudicators, whether they're arbitrators or judges, also have that knowledge. I mean, certainly in the UK, just because of the nature of our system, of our judicial system, it tends to be a more sort of, okay, Constantine is laughing. I knows exactly what I'm about to say. I'm friends and very I would say respect.
Some of your best friends.
Some of my best friends in the judiciary is very much active in trying to keep on top of all these developments, because I think in order to adjudicate some of these legal issues, it's really important for our profession, particularly those who are adjudicators, to understand at least, not like a computer scientist, but understand at least some essential features of technology. So like, lawyers talk about bias in very different ways to how computer scientists talk about bias. So, so I think that's also, it's upon our profession really to, and all aspects of the profession to really also teach ourselves, work with computer sciences. I'm a big believer in all my research working with other disciplines, and so I think this is like actually a responsibility of lawyers to be staying on top.
Are judges that you're friends with, are there formal training programs already?
I mean, it's not formal, but certainly I think as we see more disputes that involve new technologies in our courts, like I mean, they are incredibly bright, intelligent people. So I think it's more of a willingness to engage with this, and inevitably they'll have to, because the cases will come before the courts. But that's a really critical aspect of also just access to justice. I've got a lot to say about how technology can also support that, given backlogs in courts and the potential really to make justice available to many people. So they're embracing this. Certainly the UK judiciary, I say, despite maybe they tend to be a little bit older, just because you get appointed obviously later in your career. I see a willingness to learn, at least, but whether they're really on top is, I hope they get there, but I think the technology is also evolving so quickly that it's actually really hard So
I think Mimi raises a good point in terms of the judiciary, and I think her comments started with the substantive aspect of whether they should be ready for the substantive aspect of whether there is a dispute within this field. But then we're now talking also about the use of technology and the use of AI within the judiciary, and this nicely segues into what Konstantin has. I'm going to ask him to present on briefly, and in relation to the use of AI as an arbitrator, but more broadly, perhaps, Konstantin needs no introduction, but he is the one of the founder partners of Three Crowns, who is the kind host of today's session. And I think there's a lot to be learned about AI as a supporter of arbitrator role, but also in legal services. So perhaps you can share with us your views on that.
Thank you, Chian. And you said at the outset that there would be a presentation, everybody, of varied perspectives, and mine is the tech novice stroke dinosaur perspective, or novice dinosaur, if such a thing can exist, but definitely a willing one, Mimi, as you noted. And to prove the point, I'm using a yellow legal pad and handwriting that I challenge any artificial intelligence to be able to understand. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier this summer, the English Master of the Rolls, Sir Geoffrey Voss, delivered the 20th annual Law Reform Lecture to the Bar Council in London on the subject of the role of artificial intelligence in the law. And he began by setting out two guiding principles. The first was that we all owe a duty to those that we serve, the users of dispute resolution services, to make the best constructive use of the technology that is available. Technology is an enhancer of human performance in its essence, and we have a duty to use that potential. But he also emphasized the guiding principle of doing so in a manner that protected the very same users from the adverse effects of that technology. So a rather obvious but important tension there. And in addressing that tension, he identified three uses to the relevant artificial intelligence we're talking about here: large language models, generative artificial intelligence that could scan all available sources, for example, and provide a client with a prediction of the outcome of a case, one use. Another use, the use of artificial intelligence to prepare and present persuasive written advocacy. You can go into your ChatGPT and have a letter written to a friend in the style of Edgar Allan Poe if you want today. Why not have a submission drafted in the style of Toby Landau, KC? If not quite there yet, I imagine within 6 months we might be there. Imagine that. And probably not at quite the same price that Toby Landau would charge.
He's not here to defend himself, you see, but.
And he also, Sir Geoffrey Voss, also drew attention to the possibility of some decisions, judicial decisions, being taken by artificial intelligence. The type of decisions that might be taken, and let's look outside of the field of law. When I make a mortgage application, the likelihood is today that the decision will at least be consulted on by artificial intelligence, perhaps taken by my bank's artificial intelligence. And within the law, there are jurisdictions around the world that are using artificial intelligence on questions of criminal sentencing or criminal parole, because artificial intelligence can predict. And much of sentencing or parole decisions is about, statistically, what is the likely outcome of this individual with these features being let free. And so it has already begun, perhaps without many of us realizing it. We're on the cusp of a dispute resolution revolution in all fields of life, including in our world of arbitration. Changes that we cannot easily imagine or anticipate I anticipate over the next 2 or 3 years will begin taking place. And I've often heard this revolution compared to past technological revolutions, the nuclear revolution. But there are real differences here. You know, uranium-235 is extremely rare and extremely expensive. And we've done a very good job as a global community in protecting and limiting its proliferation. This is extraordinarily democratic technology that is capable of being in everyone's pocket today, and certainly if not today, in months or a few years' time. So a profoundly important revolution that raises profoundly important ethical questions for us in the legal sector. Are we entering the age of the robo-arbitrator? Never too busy, always having read all of the submissions, every footnote, all of the exhibits, never jet-lagged, never distracted, never asleep during hearings, always available to deliver a time-efficient and cost-effective decision. So using my small language model up here, if I'm asked to predict, is this going to happen anytime soon? I think I would say no. I would say that we're not on the cusp of the robo-arbitrator. And that is because I don't think that people yet trust artificial intelligence in a manner that is necessary for this kind of decision making. We want a human process. Our process does not involve simply the application of clear rules to identical facts. We are not just looking for intelligence in our decision makers. We're looking for something much less easy to define, called judgment, called imagination, called empathy, a human reaction to witnesses, which may be more complex than simply noting whether they look to the top right every time they answer a question rather than to the top left. Now, a scientist would say that what I'm talking about is biology, and a technologist would say that we are entering the realm, and certainly the epoch, of synthetic technology. And someone who is perhaps more tech enthusiast might say, do people really want flesh and blood arbitrators with all their human failings? Long-term memory, by the way, is not just a problem of some AI systems. Do users actually really want solutions? And if that comes more efficiently from AI, why not? So that's going to be a debate, even though I think at the moment the answer is no for most. That is going to be a debate that will rage in the medium term. But I think in the shorter term, there's going to be a far more relevant debate to the robo-arbitrator. And now I come to the question of the tools that will be available to the human being that we will all want, at least for the foreseeable future, to decide our cases. And to explain what I mean by these tools, let me introduce you to someone called Mustafa Suleyman, a British technologist and entrepreneur who was one of the human brains behind the startup DeepMind, then sold to Google, and more recently, one of the founders of Inflection that has come up with Pi, or personal intelligence. And for those who don't know what Pi is, it's effectively a program that you can consult with a voice that you can choose, that can be your friend, that can be your advisor, that can be probably in the future your virtual chief of staff managing your life, that can offer you information, that can offer you solutions, that can offer you opinions. Now, if we think about how this might be used for counsel, we can instantly imagine how enhanced, efficient legal services are just around the corner. But if we think about how this might be used by arbitrators, we enter a very significant ethical dilemma. Because arbitrators may be able to use a personal intelligence that has read all the evidence, read all the authorities, that knows the law, to express a view to that arbitrator. Like counsel can use that technology in preparing the brief, so the arbitrator can use that technology to prepare the award. Now, 20 years ago, I wrote an article about arbitral secretaries that was called The Fourth Arbitrator. And maybe we are now entering the epoch of a new fourth arbitrator, this time featuring artificial intelligence. And so we come to the question of regulation or governance, or something perhaps even more limiting. Someone once said that to err is human, but to really foul up takes a computer. And so how we control this, and how we control the way in which arbitrators may delegate part of the function, is going to be an extremely important question for us in the international arbitration community. Regulation is one answer, and I was sent by a former colleague who is a member of the guidelines drafting committee of the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center, a set of draft guidelines that have been presented. And one of the guidelines, draft guidelines, is non-delegation of decision-making responsibility. This, by the way, is open for consultation to all who are interested. And the rule is this in draft form: an arbitrator shall not delegate any part of their personal mandate to an AI tool. This principle shall particularly apply to the arbitrator's decision-making function. Now, there's a few, I was sent this morning, actually, just coincidentally. There's a few observations I have about this. The first is it reminds me of the guidelines that we all drafted 15 years ago about the use of arbitral secretaries. The second is that where we've ended up in those guidelines for arbitral secretaries is that non-delegation shouldn't mean we don't use arbitral secretaries to enhance the arbitrator's performance. Why is that not the same for artificial intelligence? But the third observation is this assistance is going to be, with the greatest respect to the best arbitral secretary in the world, and I served my time as an arbitral secretary as well, far more powerful than any human arbitral secretary. And so the level of regulation may have to be of a different order of magnitude. And I'm going to return, maybe by way of a final word, to Mr. Vasiliman, who has a new book out, which I haven't yet read, called The Coming Wave, in which I'm told he posits that regulation may not be enough, actually, given the profound nature of this new revolution. He's not talking about legal services, he's talking about generative AI more generally. And he's posited the prospect of a policy of containment, non-use in certain areas of human activity. Containment in the way that George Kennan in the 1950s talked about geopolitical containment, clash of civilization. So that, I think, is a debate that we are about to have in the world of dispute resolution, including international arbitration. And it is not a debate that I personally have formed a view on. It's not a debate I think I can yet, but I think that as many of us as possible need to be thinking about very acutely in the coming time.
Thank you very much, Constantine. I think there's a lot of applicability in terms of AI, and we've identified a handful of them, including the tribunal secretary, which I do think that there is a lot to be explored in that space. The point about your Silicon Valley draft guidelines, the question is, decision-making is a broad brush comment. Decision-making for what kind of decisions? Are we talking about procedural timetable decisions? Are we talking about real decisions, substantive decisions? I mean, there's a lot to explore in really creating regulations. I don't envy you, Denise, in terms of what you have to do to ensure that we have a safe environment to explore this area. We have a few remaining minutes, actually not that many. We've done very well on our time. We have a couple of minutes for questions if anybody has any. I saw some actually in our space here, in our chat from Ashan C. I'd like to know if you think whether the existing regulations for AI are doing a sufficient job in assessing the risks and opportunities in your respective fields. If not, how? And if so, how? And if not, how should we fine-tune such, or is a complete reform needed? Or perhaps an insight of such in the financial services area. Denise, is this something I'm looking to you, hoping that you'll take this one?
And I mean, to be honest, it's an excellent question. It's the most common question I get in my role is, are you going to put in place the equivalent of the EU AI Act?
Yeah.
I think that's the elephant in the room. And to be honest, horizontal legislation is one way to tackle it. It's similar to what we did last year with online safety. We passed through online safety legislation through amendments to the Broadcasting Act, and just about a month or two ago put in a code of practice that required digital technology companies, social media companies, to put in place certain housekeeping algorithms in order to protect children, for example. I think with AI, we don't, as a government, I can say, don't intend to go down that way. Traditionally, Singapore at least has not regulated technology horizontally. We don't have a blockchain act, and we tend to regulate where there is misuse or harm. So, for example, with the Copyright Act or with the misinformation legislation. And I think we're seeing it that way for now, coupling it, as I've said, with guidance. That said, because at IMDA we hold the horizontal, we also dock in and have a lot of conversations with sectoral regulators, and I don't think that you can ignore that piece. Certainly, I think if there are regulations, it will come in sectoral applications, let's say the monetary authority, and I'm not sure whether they are, I'm not saying that they're doing it, but I think they're definitely watching the space in healthcare, in financial services. And this is a conversation that we have. We do organize a regulators roundtable to have these types of conversations internally within the government. But I can say that just more broadly, at least from the Singapore perspective, we don't see horizontal legislation as the way that we want to deal with this issue.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Yeah, there were a couple of comments from the speakers. By the way, my name is Sushil Shankar. There were a couple of comments from the speakers saying that this is a democratic tool. But I would say that that would be the case only if everyone had access to this tool. And when I say access, I don't mean just the infrastructure, the computers or the AI platforms itself, but in terms of the skills required to use it also. So finally, instead of being democratic, it might actually exclude a lot of people from justice or from being able to use it. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. You know, we've been talking about the digital divide for a long time, and it's not just in the latest kind of new generative AI that's used by only some sections of the population. So I absolutely agree with you. It's one of the fundamental aspects of what we should think about. It's not just about the issues like confidentiality, privacy, bias, discrimination, but also actually being able to access the benefits of this technology. So it's important to think that actually many parts, it's to do with economic development, it's to do also with, there's many different sort of attributes of groups that might not be able to use this technology. I'm just thinking in terms of even before generative AI, the move towards just getting rid of banking clerks and closing down branches in the UK, where I just think, my grandparents have passed away now, but I just doubt that they would be able to can get money from the ATM, but some of these online platforms or going online and do banking, I just think that is actually not accessible to many people. And it's the same case as generative AI. In the context of our courts, accessing to justice, there are going to be many groups who are not going to be able to access this technology. And if we're all thinking about just going, without thinking about the disadvantage, the perpetuating disadvantage that these groups already have with accessing our justice system, then that's the wrong path to go about. So I think that raises really, thank you for asking that question. It's an important one.
Whose responsibility would be to think about this and to take precautions? Because the commercial interests are not going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. You see this with online banking. Keeping a bank branch, particularly in say rural Australia. I'm from Australia. Like, it just doesn't make sense financially. So, but yeah, I think this is where regulation and governance, and then at a sector level, that comes in.
Yeah, and I can jump in here. So INDA wears many hats, and we actually have a social sort of dimension and hat as well. And through that, we're actually working very closely with our Digital for Life team. And that's the team that's really going upstream to work with. We have a movement called Seniors Go Digital. And we actually have digital ambassadors in Singapore that go around to different segments of society to help them with basic digital life skills. It's not a perfect program. I think there's a lot more that we can do, but there are some movements and clear initiatives to do that. There is a second aspect of your question that I thought was, so I absolutely agree with what Mimi said, but another aspect is actually to what extent do these models actually represent a diversity of views in the world? And because that also impacts the access question. If you're not getting the right answers from the model, then if the model is not trained on culturally representative data, then actually it creates access issues as well. And that's also, I think, an aspect of model development and accountability that we're looking at and that we're actively talking to some of the foundational model developers about.
Yes, I think you've actually preempted this question here that answers, I think you've halfway answered this next question, and I'm very conscious of time, but the question is whether there is, whether generative AI will create inequality in ADR, that is, give certain individuals and companies more access than others. And so there is that concern, I think. Absolutely. And so there are, like the World Bank and IFC, I think that they have been instrumental in allowing for not only digital, but wireless, for example, or internet. I mean, so they will, I assume, just kind of based on what I know about these structures, will continue on with giving more access in rural areas, in less developed jurisdictions, to these types of facilities and systems. I think that this is a good place for us to wrap up, and thank you very much on a Friday afternoon on a public holiday for all of you in the room today and all of you online for joining us for what I hope will have give you some further insight on the watershed moment of generative AI and its implications on ADR. Thank you very much, speakers. Thank you very much, Wesley.